Hey everybody, it's Meta Warrior here, just doing a new series called In Defense of, where I'll be talking about a usually a controversial figure in like music or otherwise, and kind of giving my rationalization of defending them as far as their unpopularity goes. So the first one, I decided to do this. Actually finished this early this month, but I didn't get to do it until now. I had recorded it, and then there was some technical issues. But first one I wanted to do was about Riki Rachtman, who, as if you don't know, he was a video jockey or VJ of the Headbangers Ball on MTV in the late 80s, early 90s. So he's kind of a figure of a lot of scorn and ridicule at times. I started watching the Headbangers Ball in 1989, and I was a kid who was getting into metal. And that time, Adam Curry was the host, and it was awesome to have a show once a week dedicated to heavy metal music. And I watched fervently. I visited my father on the weekends because my parents were divorced, and my half brother was living with him, and he was also a watcher of the show. That is, when he wasn't trying to get laid. He was 7 years older than me, so he was living a different lifestyle than I probably ever lived. But anyways, so Adam Curry was okay, but he was a bit stiff and wooden and just kind of like a Ken doll with leather on. And the precursor to this show was a monthly show called Metal Mania, which featured Dee Snider, who had left the show in the midst of a rumored pay battle. So to say that the energy level was down for even that monthly show is an understatement. I mean, it was definitely a different energy level. But in the spring summer of 1989, it seemed like they were experimenting with having different hosts on the ball, and even Downtown Julie Brown, I recall, was actually one of the hosts a couple of times. And there was like this famous interview with Billy Milano that I caught as well. And the ball, would obviously have guest hosts from bands with varied results. In 1990, though, Riki Rachtman was announced as a replacement for Curry, and through the years he's been criticized. But I have come here to defend his good name and also stand up for someone who played an essential role in me growing up in my preteen years. And Riki, as it's well known, was the owner of a famous or infamous LA club, which proved essential to the LA metal and hair metal scene, the Cat House. So he definitely wasn't someone that they just picked up from their roster of VJs that didn't know anything about the music involved. It's also known there was some nepotism involved, as he was friends with Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses. And by the way, Riki is the first to admit this because he did recommend him for the job. Now, there are a lot of criticisms of Riki being a dork, and the thing is like, I know he's actually pretty willing to accept that people thought he was kind of a dork, and he's kind of has a self-deprecating sense of humor. And I suppose they could have picked someone like Dee Snider to host the actual Headbangers Ball, but it would be kind of hard for him to retain that energy level Saturday night after Saturday night. And I know Twisted Sister had basically broken up by that point, but nevertheless, having someone like Snider, who does quite well on the radio, I should add, could prove somewhat grating after a while. I mean, just the Dee Snider, it's just like, so on one point, I don't want someone like Dee Snider, but didn't want someone like Adam Curry. So you'd had, Adam Curry was just way too wooden, stoic, and stiff, and would be quite boring after a while. So I mean, sometimes you would actually not want to wait until the next video. So someone like Riki was kind of somewhere in between those energy levels. And to me, that worked really well for the show. He was kind of like the heavy metal everyman. He wasn't like kind of the, what was seen as kind of he wasn't like one of the trashier seen, people were, metalheads were seen as kind of outcasts and stuff at that point in time. A lot of them were. And he wasn't like one of those guys, but he wasn't like a super, serious nerd guy either. I'm going to get to that in a minute about someone that is one of those guys who is still a metal pontificator in the scene. So, and, he was kind of a guy that you could kind of put yourself, see yourself in his shoes as far as, he had these adventures with these metal bands around the world, and, with the balls, many features and contests. And someone like Snyder, who was over the top, or Curry, who was a bit dull, wouldn't have worked in these various situations, in my opinion. And Rachtman, being a dork, basically, I think worked well. Like when, Ozzy would pour water on him, or got pies in his face for his birthday, or Dave Mustaine would tool on him, which went a little too far at times, but it was kind of funny, at the time. And many of these things, along with when he did get on well with bands like, Alice in Chains or Chris Cornell or others, going bowling with him, or, just partying with him, and made it a lot of fun. So there is this perception also in the metal scene that Riki Rachtman is kind of a bandwagon jumper and all this stuff. And I don't, what I have to say about that, I think one of the things you got to remember is that, for one, I mean, one of his first appearances, he had a Motorhead shirt on. It's not like he was like just some hair metal winger dude. So, and yeah, he was pretty glammy in the beginning, but I mean, he was the owner of the Cat House, which did have a lot of different types of bands, but I know even like Megadeth or the Black Crowes played there, but that's to be expected. He had he was kind of in that dated kind of scene. But the Cat House, did have different bands and stuff. So I do recall, though, that one episode of The Ball, they actually went to, I don't know if it was he had a place in New York and LA at the time. I just remember they went to this apartment and they showed his CD collection. And it was like, 3,000 CDs or something like that, and tapes or whatever. I don't know if there were records too. I can't recall them showing that. But I think he was a lot more eclectic in his tastes than just some hair metal guy, even from the beginning. So, people may give him shit about like, well, he was hair metal, so then he got into Suicidal Tendencies and Danzig. It's like, well, he could have, he proclaims that he was a punk before he got into metal. And, there is a lineage from punk to glam metal, because there were bands like Junkyard, or even like which had former punk band guys in it, or, Faster Pussycat or Guns N' Roses were very influenced by 70s punk. I mean, there's no denying that. So I mean, it's not like when it was like 90 or 91 when he said that Suicidal Tendencies and Danzig were his favorite bands. I mean, it's not like he picked Metallica and, Nirvana or something like that. Like, I mean, people act like he was like some kind of fad guy, and like he, it's just, I don't really agree with that, or Pantera was his favorite band. He didn't say that, so, I mean, people evolve and music evolves as well. And, by having to watch these endless clones of the original hair metal, glam metal scene, like you had to do, being in the Ball or, at the Cat House, I mean, you got to think that he might have probably wanted to get a little edgier in his tastes. And I have no, doubt that he's telling the truth when he says, like, that's, he evolved as far as, or he was already, like, into a lot of that stuff before. I have no denying that. I mean, not just from the Motorhead shirt that he wore on one of his first appearances, just the vibe that I got from him. So, I mean, even Discharge had their glam years, and so I don't really want to put Riki in this category of this like trend hopper. So, and like I said before, the New York Dolls and similar bands are something that glamsters and punks could always agree on, and it's some alien idea that he would have both of those things in his DNA. So musical DNA, of course. The guy wasn't, you know, the thing about Riki Rachtman, which made it cool, was he wasn't some super intellectual metal nerd with endless minutia that he was pulling out, but he wasn't some kind of zonked out, burnout, druggy metalhead, band member that sometimes they had those kind of guys host. Those kinds of guys host the ball too, as guest hosts, and so, I mean, he definitely knew his shit. But like I was watching this thing where he asked these stupid questions, and you could just tell that, like, he was given those questions by MTV. There's no way. Like, there's a few questions. I think it was corrosion of conformity. Is like, so do you have political lyrics? It's like, well, I know he probably already knows that they have political lyrics. So it seemed like he was just asking them because of MTV. But that's kind of one of those things. So I think he had a very, everyday guy thing to him about, how he hosted the ball. And that's kind of why it was so easy to relate to him. So, speaking before, as far as interviewing endless fourth or fifth wave clone hair metal glam bands every Saturday night, or watching a lot of them come up in the scene, one of the things I'll always treasure about Riki Rachtman and his time in the Headbangers Ball, which is like 5 years, obviously, was his kind of passive aggressiveness towards bands he didn't like, or towards videos that he had to premiere that he didn't like. He had this like tone of voice, body language, and this nonverbal communication that would let the audience know that he thought the band was shit, and that he was being forced by MTV to interview them or give them accolades or whatever. He's like, this is the new video from I don't know, girly girly called Sexy Sexy. It's it's a new band that's coming up. Oh, by the way, there's a new Danzig song coming out. And actually, he'd be more serious about that, So it was cool watching that, and at 11 years old or whatever, I think when I started watching the ball, it was pretty awesome to see. So, and you kind of empathize with him as he's had to sit through these banal interviews if he didn't like a band, and he basically obviously did the same thing with videos. So overall, I think, regardless of the backlash that Riki Rachtman had as far as being the host of the Headbangers Ball, I found him to be, somewhat articulate, amicable, definitely, funny, and a worthy host of a weekly metal show. I mean, that's something that I think, like I said, I think as far as why I said somewhat articulate is because, like, sometimes he would be forced to ask these stupid questions, and it's just like, you should know better. But of course, watching some of that, that MTV was pushing him to do this or that, So I always thought he was cool in a certain way, and it was fun seeing his self-deprecating humor or his passive-aggressive things towards bands he didn't like. And he's no slouch as far as being, in the music scene. I mean, he was the head of one of these huge rock and metal clubs. He was in bands in the 80s and the 90s. So I don't think him being some poser is really accurate. So, and some of those episodes of the Headbangers Ball, I'll always cherish that as part of my childhood growing up, because that was just like, it was so cool, and I always will like that part of my life when I was coming up as a kid. So that's all I got to really say. I'm going to be doing more of these in defense of videos, and look forward to it.